Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and today we are going to be looking at the safety numbers from the Combine. Here we are post-Combine, getting ready for the 2023 NFL Draft. If you do want to download this chart or look at it closer, you can up at the website www.theffforge.com. There is a link down in the description. As I said, we will be looking at the safeties, and there are 4+ prospects that we're going to look at. 4 of them that we're going to look at just traditionally like I have been so far in this series. Quick note, last season when I did this same process, I had no clue about any of the names in the NFL draft at that point. I was clueless. But some of the names that stuck out to me at this position were Kyle Hamilton, Daxton Hill, Louis, Cine, Marquise Ball, Tyson Anderson, Kirby Joseph, who was my personal favorite. So it was a mixed bag when he picked off Aaron Rodgers this last season. And then, of course, Nick Cross, all exciting guys. But this season, I am quite a bit more up to date. I'm very much aware of at least like the first and second round expected guys to be drafted, but I'm trying to not let that cloud my process too much. I'm really trying to still just pick guys that I find interesting based on their athletics and their physical assets. That is one thing of note here. This is really just based on the athletics, the physical numbers, all the measurements that we get at the Combine. This is not a complete picture of these guys. It's more of like trying to figure out what their ceilings are. With that being said, before we get into it real quick, this chart, the coloring scheme here should be pretty obvious. It is also written down here in layman's terms. This is what I think of when I see the colors. Mathematically, although those numbers are not exact, that is what it's saying. Then I did another thing this year, which was just to help point out maybe players that might not have stood out to me otherwise, and this is a size-adjusted prospect score. So really taking the mass of the guys, their pounds divided by their height, which is in inches, and then looking at these athletics through that lens. It's not some kind of all-inclusive prospect score. Now here is the end result of that, and there is just one slight difference with the data set here. This also includes all of the Pro Day numbers from guys last season, so it is a larger data set. However, it's also a less accurate data set in some ways, I believe, and so that's why I've kept this pure over here. So with that said, let's get to the first guy that I will be covering in this episode, and that is Ji'Ayir Brown up here at top of the chart. There you can see his numbers, check those out. Ji'Ayir is obviously short at 5'10", but he's also incredibly well built. Pound for pound, he is a beast, and man oh man, is he a really good athlete. I believe he has the highest size-adjusted score out of anybody at any of these positions, and over here you can see what that looked like. A lot of excellence there. Bench, 40 time, hands, gotta love it. And he also has some solid giddy-up in his first step. He has a strong upper body, and he has a strong base, as you could have seen from his vert and broad. Probably already have some clips going up on him. To me, that sounds like a very solid, run-stuffing, strong safety, possibly even a linebacker-esque box safety role, maybe a better spot for him depending on the system. What I'm saying is that I think that he has a role on any defense, but teams will want to and need to put him in positions to take advantage of his strengths. There are some things he just shouldn't be asked to do, largely due to his height. I caught a lot of the safety interviews, which I will be sharing at the end of this video, but unfortunately, I missed his. The first thing I saw in his scouting report is that he has good instincts, and that's about all that I needed to see in order to solidify a love for this guy. I'm going to put a late first-round draft grade on him because I think, in the right situation, he could be an absolute stud for the next decade. Think Tyrann Mathieu, but with like 20 more pounds on him. And that will bring us to the second guy on this list. And by the way, the order of this list has no impact on how I actually feel about these guys compared to one another. It's just the order that I ended up gathering them in. And the second man I have highlighted here, Ji'Ayir Brown, you can see his numbers there. And this dude, he had my absolute favorite interview with the press at the Combine, and I called him a student of the game. As a coach, this is the guy that I would want on my team. I don't even care how good he is. I think he will stick around in the NFL because of that and probably find his way into coaching after that. Unfortunately, his combine, those numbers are not pretty, but I fell in love with him and I put a contingent third round draft grade on him before looking at his scouting report. Once I did look at that scouting report, the first sentence was, Ji'Ayir Brown is coming off of 2 of the most productive seasons a safety has had in college football in the past 10 years. And at this point, I'm just feeling like they're trying to give me blue spears here. Like, I'm getting excited. However, a little bit further down on the report, I did catch that he only has average instincts, and that is a big deal at the safety position. So that brought me back to earth for Ji'Ayir, and at the end, maybe a later third round guy, kind of dependent on the year, but I'd be happy to get him at that point in the draft. And next up, we are going to be looking at Daniel Scott, who is second up here, just right below Sidney Brown on the size-adjusted score. And in some ways, Daniel is like a Sidney Brown light. However, he does have a more prototypical build. I like that he tested in the shuttle and the 3-cone, and he did well in those. That shows me some closing speed and an ability to change direction, which, when you combine that with some good pure speed, you have a guy who may be able to play as the high safety with a solid build still. He's not too small. Unfortunately, what's easily a second to third round draft profile, athletic profile for him, comes with a lot of issues that you do not want in a safety, at least according to the scouting report that I read. And I think a team will take a shot on him, but it really sounds like he's going to need to dedicate himself to the sport and actively learn from his coaches to make it at the next level in the NFL. He's a late round guy. You need to be enthusiastic, consistent, and be able to tackle at the next level. All apparently issues for Daniel. The highlights reel sure does look nice though, doesn't it? And then that's going to bring us up to our last guy on this list that we will be looking at some clips for, and that is Jartavius Martin, fourth down here on the size-adjusted score. And there are his stats. You can see there an excellent 10 split on the 40. And same with his vert and his broad, those were good. Definitely seems like a solid free safety prospect, or possibly even a nickel guy with that solid base and that quick first step of his. Although the bench reps do concern me as to how well he could hold up against the bigger slots in the league and tight ends if he's asked to do that. There are definitely things to like about him, and the scouting report on him is mostly good news. For the first time in the series, I'm just going to go out on a limb and I'm going to give him a comp based on what I'm seeing. And that comp is going to be a guy from the Kansas City Chiefs. Do you have any guesses of what guy on the Kansas City Chiefs I might be calling a comp to Jartavius Martin? It is L'Jarius Sneed. To clarify, I am talking about the end results of their play, kind of some or the bulk of what might be asked for them by a team. However, they do have some different assets. And so I'm not talking about how they get to those results, just the end result. Both guys that can play near the line, that kind of thing. That's a darn good comp, if you ask me. I do have one quick notable name that I'm just going to kind of toss out here, and then I'm going to get on to the interviews with a few names that also came out of those interviews or that stood out to me in one way or another. But first up is this notable name, and that is Trey Dean III, who is 6'2", so definitely like that height. And he also put up 25 reps on the bench, and that's exciting. So go Trey Dean. Now on to the interview notes here. And first up, I have Antonio Johnson, and he likes to hit. Well, first, why don't we point them out? So Antonio Johnson's right down here if you want to look at him. And so Antonio Johnson likes to hit, and he absolutely lights up at the opportunity to blitz. And what I mean by that, when that topic came up in his interviews, or in the press conference scenario, he absolutely lit up when the topic of blitzing came up. And I like that from a guy. I like very physical, active safeties. The only issue that I had was that he actually said this, even though it was very apparent, is that he couldn't think on the spot. And for me, I don't that's a bit of an issue. And to be fair, this may not have been Antonio Johnson. It was while the safeties, the D-back group was doing their interviews that I realized, hey, I should be doing a real job of scouting here and actually writing down things as I notice them about these players. So it's possible that he had been like 5 interviews earlier, so there were a few. It's possible I got that confused, but I'm pretty sure I nailed it down to the correct guy, and so that is a bit of a concern to me for Antonio Johnson. I want guys to be able to read and react at the beck and call and not get overwhelmed by a situation and not being able to think on the spot. The next guy here I have is J.L. Skinner, and he was quite mumbly up at the podium. He's the only guy that I wrote this about, and to me that means he might not be the best communicator. That could possibly be an issue for him. And so for me at the safety spot, obviously all of them don't need to be excellent communicators, quarterbacks of a defense, but personally that's something that I do want out of the guys and even in the locker room while on the field at practice. I don't want a guy to be too mumbly. That's just a concern for J.L. Skinner. I do know that he is one of the more highly touted guys in this class, but observations. Now on to Jordan Battle, and I wrote that he's fun going. I didn't write easy going, although right after fun going I also wrote that he's easy to talk with. He was very casual, likable, just, fun going, easy to talk with. He's also an active listener. There was a lot of head nodding going on as he was listening to questions to affirm that he's understanding what they're saying. And Brian Branch called him a leader. These are all, I think, great assets for the locker room and on the field. So really, Jordan Battle was a guy that the first time that I looked at this draft class, I really like safeties, by the way. I was impressed with, just based on what the limited information I was looking at, and then kind of cooled off of that a little bit. But he's back into, I guess, guys that I would consider target guys that I like. We're going to move on to a guy who may have made that list, and I think I've kind of taken him off, which is Brandon Joseph. Once again, don't like to focus on the negative, so here's the positive on him. I think that he's a thinker. The bad aspect, potentially, is that he, when asked about, like, hey, where do you fit on a defense? Almost all of the guys at every position are always like, whatever the team that drafts me asks me to do, I'm ready, willing to do. I can excel at that. Sometimes they might point out where their strengths are, but they pretty much never say, hey, I have a preference to play deep. I don't want to be running down into the trenches and getting dirty and tackling. I want to play deep. And to be honest, when we look at Brandon Joseph, sorry I haven't been pointing these guys out, but where are you, Brandon? Right here, you see the speed, and maybe that's why he wants to play deep. Maybe so he doesn't get beat. I don't know. I do think that being a thinker is really good quality, and just based on what I know outside of looking at this information and whatnot, and what he's done on the field, I'm sure he'll be a solid player, but I do have concerns that maybe he's more of a depth piece on the team, a rotational player, a guy who maybe hits his stride 4 years down the road as he continues to really learn the game truly well and can, instead of react, can be proactive in his movements. That might be the Brandon Joseph that a team ends up getting. It might take a little while, in my opinion. Then and a limited opinion of that. Then we have Anthony Johnson Jr., and all I wrote for him was he was sincere, which that's a great quality. Not much else apparently stood out. All right, yeah, those are the guys: Sidney Brown, Ji'Ayir Brown, Daniel Scott, Jartavius Martin. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any kinds of inputs on these players, if you have any opinions based on what you've seen yourself, I am happy to hear that. Doesn't need to be any of the players that I brought up. It could be any of these other guys. Love to have conversations about the prospects this time of the year. So I will definitely get involved or check out a guy if you have a recommendation for me. So, bye-bye.